program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to this Touchstone's beginning session on the Digital Doctorate. Hi, my name is Tara Brabazon. This is a big issue for all of us to consider in all universities around the world. It is indeed the time for the Digital Doctorate. At Charles Darwin University, just under half of our students are enrolled in an off-campus delivery mode, and between 1/3 and a half of our students are part-time. So a large group of our students have an analogue disconnection from the campus, from their supervisor, and from the facilities that many of us take for granted. But also, every single student may confront the issue of a supervisor going on sabbatical, a supervisor going on holiday, a supervisor leaving the organisation for a post somewhere in the world, or indeed a student or supervisor moves their job or their family responsibilities, and that occurs, of course, often at the worst point of a candidature. So as you can see, the notion that a student and a supervisor lives in Darwin and attends the campus at Casuarina or the waterfront or the city campus for the entirety of the 3 years is not a reality for most of our postgraduate students. The higher education sector right now is volatile. We are living with and through short-term contracts, the precariat workforce, and social and economic change. Ruptures, really. So this is reality. None of us can know what our lives or the world will look like in 3 years' time. I was in a different job, in a different state 3 years ago, and the 3 years before that, I was in a different country, in a different job. And this is what the contemporary workforce looks like. This is what it is. And that impacts on both students and supervisors. So the question now is, what are we going to do about it? And I'm going to show you today how to manage this volatility while maintaining a continuity of care for our students during supervision. I want to introduce two shapes to you. Now, I love a bit of shape work, so here we go. And the first shape is horizontal. It simply moves through the stages of a student's candidature: admissions, progressions, and examination. So remember these three stages: admissions, progression, and examination, and the strategies I'm going to offer about supervision will track through these stages. The second shape I'm going to offer you features quadrants. So imagine a square that's cut into 4 sections. And in those sections are the following words: analogue, digital, synchronous, and asynchronous. Now, each of these squares talk to the other one, and they have specific relationships, and a specificity of useful applications and behaviours emerge for students and for supervisors wherever we are in the world and wherever a student may be in their candidature. So, for example, digital synchronous is Zoom, digital asynchronous is an email. Analogue synchronous is a face-to-face meeting in our office. Analogue asynchronous is when we as supervisors read a draft, perhaps a draft paper when we're in our lounge suite at home. There are many different applications and behaviours that occur that are useful and productive when we start to play with these 4 squares and their relationships. So I'll just whack in 4 quick definitions for each of these terms for you. Obviously, synchronous, in real time, sharing real time, real communication. Asynchronous, a delay between one communication event and another. Analogue, I really love this word. The etymology comes from biology, medicine, computer science, internet studies. Now, analogue from biol refers to an organ or part of an organ that is similar in some way, such as a structural derivation of a parent chemical compound, say. But analogue is best described through the analogue clock. And that tells us a lot about the etymology of analogue. So analogue as an adjective refers to the measuring or the representation of data on a continual scale. Think about the clock face. The arms of the clock are always moving, seamlessly, gently. It doesn't snap the change like a digital clock. It is continually moving. So analogue, through this definition, is that which is not digital. And it therefore has been used in internet studies to describe physical objects and bodies that continually move, so they have variable physical qualities rather than digitisation, pixelation, screens. So in many ways, the analogue-digital binary opposition is the bodies versus screens definition. But it's also used pejoratively, of course. You're analogue, meaning you're not digital and therefore not modern. I don't use it in that way. But the digital is the culture, the media, the economy, founded, developed and stored through binary numbers. And this binary code allows information with very little redundancy because of packet switching. It allows information to move through space and time with speed and ease. The characteristic of digitisation is mobility. Information moves. So the point of all of this, of thinking about digital and analogue, asynchronous and synchronous in doctoral education, means we have to talk overtly about the current architectures of identity. Who we are transforms through digitisation, deterritorialisation and disintermediation. New opportunities exist for all of us to be different versions of ourselves in different portals and locations. So not surprisingly, therefore, reading and writing and research and supervision also transform. But what I'm arguing in our session today is, in my quadrants, I want you to start to think about your architectures of identity as a supervisor and how they align and relate to the architectures of identity that you want to summon through supervision for your students. Just because the technology exists doesn't mean it should be used, and it certainly doesn't mean that it's used well. So we make a choice. We think with consciousness about the interfaces and the platforms that work in different stages of our supervisory career. And we also talk about which platforms and behaviours are not working at this point of our career. We must not let the simple availability of the technology determine our choices. We need to let our learning outcomes, our goals, our milestones determine the appropriate technological choice. So let's return to that life cycle of the PhD student and how we can use these different combinations of analogue and digital, synchronous and asynchronous at each stage of our supervisory research career. So let's start at admissions. I'm amazed that students don't shop for supervisors more overtly when they go into a program. So let's think about digital asynchronous. And of course, that's important to the search for supervisors. Are the supervisors intensely research active? Are they decent human beings? How do they treat their students? How do we get them through in the minimum time? All that material is available for students to find. There's so much information online now when our students search for a supervisor. Then, of course, students can summon either an analogue or a digital synchronous media platform like Zoom, or, of course, a prospective student can walk into a supervisor's office and talk to them. So there's never been more information about particular supervisors than right now. Students will find it and students will use it. And so there should be no reasons for any surprises during the candidature. Okay, so our students have found you a great supervisor by digital and analogue means. Let's get into progression. So your student is enrolled in a candidature. What is that candidature going to look like? Well, we need to break it down into meetings, feedback, and milestones. The characteristic of students that finish in 3 years is weekly meetings. They can be 30 minutes, they can be short, but they're weekly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. It doesn't matter if those meetings are digital or analogue. They need to be synchronous. So the meetings can be in your office or they can be via Teams. So therefore, off-campus students can have an equally quick and effective supervision through weekly, digital, synchronous meetings. The key is the synchronous connectivity, whether it's analogue or digital. So let's move to feedback. Feedback can be delivered digitally or via analogue means, but often feedback is asynchronous. So that means, like the old days, we can draft on a piece of paper and hand that paperwork back to the student, or we can digitally do it via tracked changes. The rub comes into the system with the degree of asynchronous behaviours that students will be prepared to accept. Let me give an example. So there's no doubt that the number one complaint I receive in my office is that supervisors don't give their students timely feedback. Now the question is, what actually is timely feedback? Now I try to get absolutely everything back to my students within a week. Sometimes I'm able to do it in a day, but I'm aware getting that feedback to students is challenging. And that's why if I have a couple of hours free and I have a piece to read, I try to do it immediately so the turnaround is fast. And of course, you know, my 10 drafts at the end of the candidature takes 10 weeks. But I'm also aware that students continue to complain, really no matter what, that they're endlessly waiting for feedback. I understand the frustration, but I also try and make sure that our students understand the pressure that we as supervisors are under. And they ask the question, when do you think this work will come back to me? That they're alert and they ask the question. And what I try and explain to students is, as academics, we don't have control over 90% of our working day. And that 10% is where we fit in the PhD asynchronous drafting work, also our honours students, our master's students. And by the way, that's also where we do our research as well. But let me tell you about my last week as I record this session for you. 5 theses arrived for me to read on the same day. So I had 480,000 words to draft. Now I finished 3 of those theses in 5 days and was finishing the last 2 on Saturday and Sunday. And one of my students emailed me on the Friday asking, where is my draft? Now I had to take some deep breaths and I explained to the student I was working as quickly as I can. Now I feel really guilty that I can't give all my students feedback almost immediately, but there's no doubt that feedback is crucial. And we all should move between analogue, that is paper, and digital drafting, because paper and screens find different errors. So let's talk about milestones. There's absolutely no reason why an off-campus student should come onto campus to deliver a milestone seminar or any seminar. I know a lot of colleagues disagree with me, but the world has changed. Students have busy lives, they're in full-time work, they have family responsibilities, and most people these days can't leave their life, pay an airfare, and travel 18 hours to deliver a 1-hour seminar. That is bonkers, particularly because we now have platforms, I think, that so effectively enable synchronous digital delivery of seminars, of lectures, of milestones, of presentations. So yes, Teams, yes, Zoom, all are great options. And also remember, I think, that digital asynchronous options are available. Each of our milestones talks about oral communication. And this does not mean coming onto the Casuarina campus and speaking. That is analogue synchronous. But we could be talking about podcasts or videos that our students produce. They talk through their ideas, perhaps with you. So the gift of digitisation is deterritorialisation. Our students can be anywhere and be supervised. Our students can be anywhere and get feedback. Our students can be anywhere and they can do their milestones. So let's finish with examination. We have a fully digital examination process at CDU. Supervisors nominate examiners digitally. Their profile and expertise is checked by our faculties and the Office of Research and Innovation. Theses are sent out digitally. Examiners return their reports digitally. So the full capacity of asynchronous digitisation is used through examination. Examiners can be and must be from around the world. They are the global experts in their field. If they're on the internet, they can receive a thesis. And this also increases the speed of the delivery and verification of the results for our students. So, examinations are now completely digital, and when CDU does move to oral examinations, I see absolutely no reason why these can't be conducted digitally through synchronous means. I've done a stack of digital oral examinations around the world, absolutely no problem, no issues, no worries. So we can see how synchronous and asynchronous digitisation is transforming supervision, feedback, milestones and examination. Now, obviously, different disciplines will have different priorities and possibilities. For the lab-based disciplines, you are the least impacted by asynchronous and synchronous digitisation, but it certainly can impact on increasing the speed of your feedback. And if our students have that writing up period, then the analogue real-time component of supervision on the Casuarina campus can drop away. So we can be anywhere in the world and write up a thesis. Analogue synchronous means will still dominate candidatures in the experimental sciences and engineering, but all sorts of options are available post the lab work to streamline candidature management and feedback. For our students in the social sciences, particularly with fieldwork elements, I think your research life is most transformed. Your supervision is most transformed. So our students are in the field, they're living analogue, they're living synchronously, but they can reflect and write up on this process digitally and asynchronously. So we can also keep in touch with our students when they're on the field through asynchronous and perhaps synchronous digital means. For our ethnographers, balancing analogue and digital, synchronous and asynchronous platforms and interfaces, we are really creating a new way of doing fieldwork. Perhaps the most exciting developments occur when we're managing digitisation in asynchronous and synchronous means in the theoretical theses. Now, these tend to be located in the humanities and the social sciences, but science literacy, science communication, these are great and burgeoning areas where this is incredibly relevant. Digitisation transforms theoretical theses. These areas used to be referred to as desk research. Yawn. Well, now the desk is a TARDIS. Through digitisation and the open access movement, we can be anywhere in the world and reading and engaging with the most exciting research in the world. We are not limited by our body. We are not limited by our location. We are fully deterritorialised. But that also means that students can select the best supervisor in the world, and they're not limited by being in an office. Online libraries can reach us anywhere. This means particularly when a student is not on a scholarship or stipend, and remembering that the overwhelming majority of students in doctoral programs are not on scholarships or stipends, that students can select the best supervisor in the world who will get them through in 3 years. Supervision is no longer location dependent. We are now at a point of supervision, a point of examination, where a student can be in one location and a supervisor in another, and it makes no difference. What I hope you've got out of this Touchstone beginning session is a consciousness of options. We must remember that how we were supervised is not how we will supervise. We now have those quadrants, analogue and digital, synchronous and asynchronous, and they combine in innovative ways to create a new mode of doctoral education. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening to Touchstones, our professional development program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University.